Welcome to our interview with David Watkins. David grew up in Rosemont and has worked for the annual fund for giving for the Philadelphia Orchestra. He will tell you about his life and his love of music.
I would like to introduce you, Mr. David Watkins. He is a member of our first violin section of the Haverford Bryn Mawr Orchestra, and he's been playing with us since, I think, the fall of 2014.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've been
2014.
about almost 6 years.
Yes, almost 6 years.
Yeah.
So we'll start, I think, by asking, David, how did you get your start in music?
Well, it was in elementary school when I first actually heard classical music. I heard it at home very rarely, but it was in elementary school. We had a nice musical program. We had some very nice music teachers there. The thing about it, I started listening to classical music very early from radio performances. I didn't even know what was happening in mechanically, but I just loved it. It was just like good food. But it was something that I just hooked on. I know my parents weren't classically, had a background in classical music, but I liked it. My mother did study piano for a while, but she always wanted us to be exposed to music, but not just classically, but I just stuck with classical music because it did something for me. It was the only thing. Jazz has never really been my forte, but classical music is my spirit and my soul and mind. That's it. Anything else, I can hear it and take it from there, but classical music is my love, first love.
Were there any other musicians in your family?
Only my uncle. My uncle was more the influence there. He was a piano teacher, very fine piano teacher. Yes.
And where did he live?
He lived now. Now my uncle's family is from the Coatesville area. He was born up here. He wasn't born in the South. His mother, I know, wanted her son to be a pianist, and that's where he studied. He studied with people like German teachers that were hard on them at that time. And being a black musician, he had to really put himself to the grind. But Uncle Louis was a very fine teacher. He did teach us disciplines. He'd never let us play by ear in the beginning.
That's great.
Never.
Wow, that's really interesting. And did you start with the violin or another instrument?
Violin.
Always from the violin.
And I did study piano for 3 years, and the only reason I studied piano is I wanted to get the structure of the steps of how I could relate to the violin. Because the violin, actually, you can't really see them physically, you have to mentally see them. And the piano gave me that structure of the way I could visualize on my steps on the violin string. And it was perfect because then I knew half steps where it is, E and F, and what is it, C and E, and C and B, and all that.
That's absolutely, and that's exactly how we
Yeah.
teach music theory from the keyboard.
Yes.
That's very, very important. And did your uncle reinforce that? Or did
No,
you
I at that time, I wasn't aware of what I was thinking when I was applying that at the time, but I knew by that structure of the piano keyboard could give me a picture of how to place my fingers on the string. I did that all just somewhat consciously because I said that's the only instrument I can really relate to is steps.
That's wonderful.
That's the only reason. And I studied that for 3 years just to get the idea of the whole workings of the piano and its accompanying and everything and all that. But it was really to learn the whole steps of your placing fingers.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious, many classical musicians speak about certain works, musical works that are sort of turning points in their lives as young people. making them want to, play classical music. I know my husband just did an interview for a concert he did recently, and he remarked that it was recordings of Handel's Messiah and Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. Now, you said you listened to the radio. Were there any particular works that really struck you?
Well, you know what? My second love was opera.
You told me that once. Yeah.
Opera, I didn't understand it, but the music was so gorgeous, and it overwhelmed me because that was the only thing I could really hear in my time, because at that time we didn't have a FM radio. If you had it, you were very wealthy and could afford it. FM came at the time I could afford an FM AM radio. And opera I used to listen. And then at one time, Channel 12, when it first came, they used to do operas like in Cinescope. They did them years ago. This was before it was really popular. They did old movies of European performances. And that's how I used it. And I used to have to get the television early before my brothers and sisters to get to look at them. But I really was like a person hunting for something. And that's the only reason I liked music, because, it was part of what I was going to find for myself. Because, I had other people around me, but classical music was sort of my second breathing, I should say. Really was my lifeline, part of my makeup there. And opera I liked right away too. I liked opera right away. I didn't understand all the languages, and of course I was hooked on Wagner, and that's something. But Wagner is so deep. But the operas that I listened to was the Meistersinger, Tannhäuser. And then the Ring was too complex. Some of it was complex. Some of the music I liked, but as a child, it was the Lohengrin, Flying Dutchman. Oh, I love that one. I had seen a motion picture. This was years ago. It was done of Wagner. It's called Magic Fire. It was an old movie, very old. I don't know if it still exists, but it had Miss DiCarlo was Nina Wagner. She played that part, and I've forgotten who was Wagner, some European artist, but I remember it was called Magic Fire. That was the name of the movie, because they did the Magic Fire, of course, from the Ring and all that. That's why they called it the Magic Fire. But that I enjoyed immensely. I just hunted down mostly everything on the radio as much as I could get on AM. And then on FM, I could have a big choice of, I could hear. WFLN was my first radio FM station. I listened to that all the time. I love WFLN. I hated to see the format change, but they had to because of reasons. Right. But WFLN, when it was on, that's what my station was.
Wow. Now, how did your friends respond to you playing the violin? Did you know?
Well, then that's another thing. I had just so many friends anyway because I was classically. Now, to be honest with you, in high school, there were a couple, I would say, associates. Now, I remember Bob Jorgen, when we were in middle school, he was a pianist, and he used to accompany me anyway. His father was a minister, and he played piano very well, very well, very well. And then, I must tell you, there was a young lady, she was a grade ahead of me, her name was Phoebe Snover, great flutist, excellent flutist. She won many awards, and she won Tri-County concerts. You've heard of them. Sure. She wasn't even a senior when she, I think she was in 9th grade when she won one. And then when she got to be up in the higher grade, she got to go to the All-State band and all. She was excellent, an excellent student too, besides. And I remember I had asked Phoebe, would she play, it was really a duo for 2 violins, but we didn't have another violinist So she did a duo. It was called a duo by Dunkler or something. It was for two violins, but she did the first violin part to do the flute. We did it as a sort of, we call it as a trio. Bob Jorgen played the piano and I played the second violin part, but she was very, very gracious. Phoebe never thought she was above anyone. She would always be very congenial.
Wow. Now, tell us about your violin teacher.
Oh, yes.
You told me about this.
Okay, my violin teacher, of course, my uncle taught me the beginnings, but then, of course, I had to get another teacher after in high school. I had Ronald Shapey at Settlement in the beginning, but then I wanted to change, and I had seen Mr. Ordenberg was the chairman of the department at that point, but then I had to ask, could I have Lillian Sinberg? And Lillian Sinberg, she was an excellent teacher. I said to her in the beginning, I wish I had studied with you, because she had to do a lot of changing. Because, see, my uncle could only tell me so much, but I had to relearn a lot of things. And I thought that I didn't let it frustrate me. Then I said, well, Miss Sinberg would be that kind to take on a student that had to revamp everything. I went through the pressures about 3-4 years changing things. So near the time I was getting ready, about 5 years after studying with Miss Sinberg, one lesson she said, oh, that's very good. I said, oh my God. After all these years, she's been, but see, the point about it is, I even wrote in my notes that I should have studied earlier. I started at 12. Studied at 12, and I had to regroup a lot. I had to a whole lot of things had to go to be fixed. So I tell everyone today, if possibly, study early with a good teacher. If you're going to play well, you must study.
Just want to make sure. Go ahead. Just keep going.
Okay. Study with a good teacher in the beginning, because it does have a lot of heartache after if you don't.
Just want to make sure that everything is working. There we go. Oops. We can. I just want to. It's recording. Okay, good. Keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
So, my information or something to tell students that if they want to play long enough and play well, and if they're going to be professional, you should get good teachers. Good teachers are important. The best thing is to get a good teacher, and the only way you know that is by what they have done before. And you find out who they studied with is important. And you have to find one that'll fit your temperament, because sometimes they don't always fit your temperament. I believe I knew after studying with Miss Sinberg, she did something that I knew. See, I should have been like a duck taking to the water and knowing at the time this was the teacher. If I had someone in my family say, oh, this is the teacher you study with. Because you have to have experience, because this is the way I look at it this way. Before, if I had a child, I would know what their temperament was about and try to match it.
Right.
And you have to be aware of this.
Yes,
it's not like if you never studied, you don't have the exposure.
Right.
This is why I'm as aware of my own playing, and I'm very critical more now than ever, because I said, what would Miss Sinberg do? And what would she say if you don't go through this passage over until you know the next one?
Right.
And that's the way you should learn day one.
Right. You said you also studied theory and harmony?
Yeah, with Morris Hinken.
Great. So tell us about that.
Morris Hinken? Well, Mr. Hinken, I studied privately with him. And when I was studying with him, and of course with Miss Sinberg, she said, why do you want to study harmony? I said, well, that's part of the understanding of your works you're playing, so you know the structure. I mean, I had to actually hunt down someone to make me understand music as a whole thing. It wasn't just playing the violin. You have to learn all the other little details to make yourself understand the whole picture.
That's terrific.
And this is why I took private lessons, because I didn't want to go in a class, because sometimes you don't get everything in a class. I wanted someone to, sort of be a mentoring me privately, because I think I learn with someone telling me something one-on-one mostly.
Right.
I learn better if I can go to a teacher. I mean, you can't have all that luxury all the time. But since I was going to study, I was going to do it privately so I could concentrate and know what's happening. So this is why I took lessons at Settlement private. They were every Thursday evening, because I used to have to go to work and then come and then study with Mr. Hinken in the evening. And sometimes I just forced myself to go, because I said, if I'm going to be any kind of musician, I have to learn theory and harmony and see how everything works. So she understood. She just was playing the devil advocate. I know why she said that.
Yeah.
I understood it. She wasn't being. She just wanted to see what I was going to say. And Miss Simberg was a wonderful person. And I say this in earnest too. That my second cousin Emma, if Emma was living at the time Miss Simberg was, she would have loved Emma.
Mm-hmm. Emma's the author, right?
Emma's the doctor.
The doctor.
And her partner is the writer.
The writer that I've read.
Yeah,
some of her
Nicole.
books. Nicole, and she's the one whose books I've read. Yes.
They're
wonderful books. Right?
Yeah. Right.
Now, so tell us. You want to tell us any more about any other your teachers that you've had, and also about the orchestral experience?
Yes. Now, this is the next person I had. Of course, Dr. Yanni Zanto. He was a very fine music teacher. Then there was Dr. Colucci at New School.
Oh, I know Dr. Colucci.
Yeah, he taught me the further advanced.
Yeah, he's more the theory.
I studied with him for a while too. So Dr. Colucci, and then of course David Reitman. I studied with him for a minute. He's down. I think he's in Australia now. Yeah. Wow. So, okay, now the orchestras I was in, of course, the first orchestra I was in was the Lansdowne Symphony. And I had great experience there because Mr. Elkin had been a member of the Philadelphia Orchestra. He was a violist. And, of course, he had his own studio in music publishing. And I studied with him, I was with them about 10 years before I even played in a real professional group. Now, this is where I have to tell you now, I'll tell you the background of this. I was a member of the Afro American Symphony Orchestra. That was established by Reverend Leon Sullivan. He had gotten this group. James Frazier was a very fine conductor, and he came around this area back in the 70s. And so they had taken a study about members of professional orchestras, and at that time they didn't have that many blacks in the major orchestras, and they figured that by starting an orchestra with minorities and of course all black folks, this was something to raise the standard of the conscience of the country. And James Frazier, being a great conductor as he was, because he had won the Guadio Cantelli competition. Wow. He won it back in before I guess in the 60s. Well, anyway, that's what was the drawing card, his ability. And Reverend Sullivan, they started to form this orchestra. So when we did our debut, it was at the Academy of Music. And they had a good write-up. He wrote up a nice article about us. And then the New York Times gave us a little good one. But they were a little more critical because we were a young orchestra. And of course, when you're young, they're going to look at the experience of the sound and all that. But they did write us up a nice one, right up. And then, through some form of communication, Stevie Wonder had heard about our orchestra. So it wasn't until 1979 that this orchestra, that he wanted an orchestra of this caliber to play in his tour of the 79. Stevie Wonder rehearsal was very interesting because we had to be in New York and rehearse at least 3 days with the music. And of course, we, I think it was the studio of instruments where we rehearsed. And it was this is how plans happen. Luckily, I knew someone in New York at that time, and they lived about a couple blocks down from me, and I didn't have to go back and forth to Philadelphia or come back home in between that time. I had the luxury to be able to stay in New York and be able to go to the rehearsals every day. So it was near our last rehearsal, and I'll never forget it. Stevie came into the rehearsal, and he was thinking how out of sight the orchestra sounded. He did say that he thought it was very good what James Frazier had put together in the small time we had the rehearsals. So in the meanwhile, we were getting ready to go on tour, and they were going to have us go in the bus, on bus transportation. But the weather at that time was bad, and the management, Black Bull was their management, they decided to fly us to Chicago and Detroit and back and forth because they didn't want us to be delayed. So what we did, of course, we were put on the plane and everything. So the first concert was in Chicago. And then we went to Detroit. We played at the Ford Auditorium in Detroit. Then New York, the first, after Detroit, we played the Metropolitan Opera House in Lincoln Center. It was a Sunday evening. I couldn't believe it. I was so astounded. I said, if I don't ever play at the Met again, I'll play once. That was the most fantastic thing. Then we came the next day to Philadelphia and played at the Academy. Then, in another day, we went to Washington, played at the Constitutional Hall. Then, they had another concert booked in New York again, and we had a day or two off. We played Madison Square Garden. Now, we played the Madison Square Garden it was really a massive thing. And we were supposed to go to California, but they decided they were going to pay us the money that we got all the kinks out of the program and got it all cleaned up by performing and getting it polished. So they decided they were going to hire an orchestra out in California, one of those studio groups. But see, we had done it so well that I remember, this is the truth, Professor.
Yeah.
We were going, I believe it was the one we had the Washington performance. We were, some of the musicians were going up into the hotel because we stayed on Howard University's campus, their hotel near their campus, which was very nice. And we were going up on the elevator, and some of the members of Stevie Wonder's group said, "Oh, good, you guys can play well." I said, "Oh my God, that's a compliment." I mean, because even so, some of us were picked up musicians, most of them from New York anyway, that were more experienced. And I had the experience only in a community orchestra, and they've been playing a lot around. So I was very fortunate to play with these professional, experienced musicians. But when the musicians of his group said, "Oh, you're playing very well," they could tell we were getting into it after a tour. So when they decided to use another orchestra to go to California, they did pay everyone that was in the orchestra. I think it was over $900, and we got very good money for that.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh well, if we're not going to California, at least we got paid." See, we were contracted to go.
Right.
And they decided they figured it was more of an expense to carry this whole orchestra out there. They could just establish one out there. But the point about it is, James Frazier, when he told me this, the music that we played, he had to get it off a synthesizer so he could score it. He had to fly to California way before the tour. He told me this later. I said, "You're the one that orchestrated the music." See, because anyone on Stevie Wonder's staff didn't know how to orchestrate.
Wow.
But he did the orchestration. And see, a lot of people didn't know that.
Wow. Interesting.
And see, of course, he had to be paid for that. But my friend James Frazier was an amazing person. Not to be bragging on him, but he was really, really great. Because I had heard him do a number of concerts. And he was assistant conductor at the Dell for a couple of seasons. Then I heard him actually conduct the Pittsburgh Speed.
Right, right. Well, this kind of brings me into maybe, and I don't know if there's other things you want to talk about, maybe the sort of final question, or one of
Sure.
the is what music means to you, and how it's affected your life and its importance.
Okay. Well, I'll be honest with you. I think between music was way a person to make me have a desire to live. I would never get depressed because classical music keeps me on a high. Mm-hmm. It's my addiction, which is a healthy one.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And that's the reason I have always loved it, because it never fails you. Right. In a sense, in the world now, since I've been in the Word studying God, it has enhanced my existence. So I have two things. A spiritual one, and music is somewhat I would consider a spiritual food for the mind and soul. So it's like, if I didn't have it, I don't know, maybe I would be in an insane asylum.
Those are such beautiful, beautiful words, and really that. I don't know what more we can say, but I guess if there are other things that you want. Anything else you want to say in conclusion, in terms of just being maybe a black man?
Okay, certainly. Now, I'll say this in spite of all what we go through, right. Life is worth living, because we've had a lot of artists that had to climb to the hill to make it. And I look at it this way. If we all get on this plane of loving one another and loving to get along with one another. Music's part of it. This is the only thing that keeps people together. But I do say I had the chance to be able to tell someone at my age some of the experiences. It's worth living. Life is worth living despite whatever happens. Wow. Because even in the worst times, music will transcend. Well, and by being a black person, I'm glad I have had the opportunity to know the difference between the right and the wrong, because there are good people in every walk of life. I never judge a person, because some people say, "Oh, no." But my mother always made a statement. She says, "All people are the same." She never gave us no credit. See, because, she came from the South. But so many people harbor that. And, that tends to keep you from growing. Mm-hmm. It really does. You can't have that kind of mind, a mind that wants to grow in spite of what's happening. And that's what we have to do. We can't let somebody come in your life and no. You can have a great desire of freedom by having a free thought, and the way you do it is to just continue to think higher. And that's the only way you get through this life. And not get downtrodden because this and that. No, I tell everyone right now, this is the best time of my life. It's the best time of my life. Even so, in spite of all what's going on, I sit here and watch the trees and the breeze comes through here. I don't even have to use my air conditioning because I get that breeze through this corridor. Right.
You know, so much of what you say, I think everyone needs to hear, our students need to hear, because that's just wonderful wisdom that you have learned through music. And, you know, we need it right now in these very troubled times.
Yeah.
And facing the difficulties with trying to play music.
Sure.
Despite our lockdown and COVID and getting through the troubles right now. And I really thank you for these wonderful words, David. It's really.
I want to leave something back. Like you have a footprint. At least I can tell some people that it's worth living and really persevering, really. Because life is worth living.
Right.
When you wake up in the morning and have breath in your body, that means this is the day you have to go on and do better.
Right.
And a great person or a great individual that has the positivity of the humanity in them is a person that wants positivity. They do not like negativity. I never like negativity.
Right.
Because that's why I always surround myself with people that want to do the best they can. The best they can. And that encourages me to say, well, that's what it is. This is why some people say, why you don't have friends? And I never had a lot of friends. I had people that I thought were worth my investment in knowing. Because you can have a whole lot of associates and they're going here and going there and nobody's focused. Now, James Frazier, if he had lived, and I say that, he was a really great friend. I told some people that I figure my friends are like people's wealth. Now, I figured Diane Monroe, David Lofton, of course, my friend James Frazier, and then there was another fellow. He was gone, his name was... oh, Lord, I'll find out. But anyway, there were enough friends of mine that were doing things that were focused. And I figured this is my gravity of keeping myself straight. People that are doing something have something, I always call it a worth.
Right.
They have this worth that I figure, you know what, if they embrace me as a friend, I have to be worthy of their friendship. So I try to stay positive.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's the way I am.
So, well, thank you so much.